Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Aerospace Nation. I'm Larry Stutzring, Director of Research for the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. Well, the end of the Cold War meant to some in the early 90s that the threat of nuclear weapons confrontation was over. It was not. From 2010 to 2025 alone, Russia will deploy some 21 new types of nuclear platforms. Of course, we're in an age of renewed threats of nuclear strikes from Russia, involving NATO's support to Ukraine. To our west, China has nearly 12 such systems in production and under development. Recent revelations of China's rapid construction of ICBM sites are no less alarming. They seek their own nuclear triad of ICBMs, bombers, and subs. Well, during this nuclear weapons push by our peer competitors, U.S. nuclear modernization took a back burner in our nation's priorities. Thanks to determined efforts by the Air Force, recapitalization is in its early stages. Much work is ahead. Fortunately, the nation has superb leadership, ensuring Air Force airmen, missileers, and bomber crews are organized, trained, and equipped, and ready to employ to maintain the ultimate backstop of the nation's ability to deter nuclear aggression. Two of these highly respected leaders are with us today to examine this important security enterprise from the Air Force's perspective. We are privileged today to host in the studio Lt Gen James Dawkins, and remoting in with us is Major General Michael Lutton. General Dawkins is the Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Deterrence and Nuclear Integration. That involves providing the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief of Staff with direction and guidance for Air Force nuclear deterrence operations. Now, General Lutton is the commander of the 20th Air Force under Air Force Global Strike Command. He is responsible for maintaining and operating the Air Force's on-alert, combat-ready ICBM force. Well, thank you both for joining us today, and I'd like to give you a chance to give us some thoughts. But first, let me remind our audience that you can raise your hand and ask a question, use the raise your hand function on the app, or you can type in a question on the Q&A function of the app also, and we'll get to those questions in the second half hour. So with that, welcome again, General Dawkins. I'll hand it over to you. Tell us what's on your mind.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the offer, the invite to come here and talk about something that we are paying a lot of attention to in the Air Force and have been for several years now. And it happened, we were paying attention to this even before the threat has really manifested itself, at least more visible to the public in the last several years. You know, you mentioned Russia. I mean, they are almost complete with their nuclear modernization of their basic forces, so much so that they're working on novel capabilities that the world has not seen before, and we're concerned about that. China, you know, a breakout, as some folks have termed it, a nuclear breakout with their growth. We are concerned about, you know, how they're going to use these systems, their triad that they're developing in the future, of course. And North Korea. We didn't talk about North Korea, but that is definitely a concern. Their leaders talked about how they want to use those weapons for coercion. And speaking of that, you know, we've seen with the Ukraine conflict how nuclear saber rattling starts early. And I think that caught some of us off guard. You know, historically, when the military plays exercises, we start off a conventional exercise, and then at the very end, we have an issue where it goes to nuclear use, and then we quickly move on and go through lessons learned. We've got to start thinking differently about how we do these exercises, how we plan for competition or conflict where nuclear saber rattling or the threat of nuclear use is early, because we've got to ensure that we've thought through that before we're faced with that issue head on. And so that's where we're pushing hard to increase everyone's nuclear IQ. It's just so that if you're thinking about how an adversary might threaten or use nuclear weapons in a conflict, that helps us control escalation so that we don't stumble into something that by mistake or accident. And so that's something we're working hard on as well inside the Air Force. Turning to nuclear modernization, we talked years ago about a bow wave, a nuclear bow wave, a modernization bow wave, and what that means, like a tidal wave of requirements coming our way of fielding new systems. Well, that is here. And we were talking about that back in 2010, 2012 timeframe, sequestration hit. But back in the Obama administration, we started several of these projects. And by 2030, we're going to have several weapon systems fielded. I'm going to look down at my piece of paper here because there are so many. The B-21, and of course, I was just out at Palmdale for that rollout. That is, tracking well. The Sentinel or the ICBM replacement, by 2030, we will have those starting to be fielded. The B-61-12, the tactical weapon, if you will, nuclear weapon for Europe and for Strategic Command, or for NATO and Strategic Command, that is being fielded also. We'll have a new ICBM warhead and a reentry vehicle, the Mark 21 Alpha, and the W-87-1, the warhead that goes inside of the reentry vehicle. We'll have a new long-range standoff cruise missile to replace the air-launched cruise missile. Again, all these systems we're talking about are replacing systems that are anywhere from 30 to 60 years old. B-52, 60-year-old airplane is going to get new engines, also new radar and some new comm equipment. We've got the MH-139 to replace the Hueys. That's a helicopter out in the missile field they use for security. There'll actually also be some here in the National Capital Region to provide support for some of the missions here, non-nuclear missions here in the capital. And then the Survival Airborne Operations Center to replace the NAOC, that will be well underway by 2030. And last but definitely not least, really should start off with this, is the Nuclear Command and Control and Communications Network. That system of systems, radios, terminals, comm paths, transport pathways that are, right now we are sustaining what we have, modernizing the things that are in the pipeline, and looking to the future of what may come next. Not to forget our Navy counterparts. This is part of that byway. Of course, they have the Columbia class ballistic missile submarine and refurbished Trident missiles that are going to be building in the 30s as well. And then a key piece that doesn't get enough attention, that's the National Nuclear Security Administration. They're under the Department of Energy, and they produce the nuclear warheads. And so they have their government-owned contract-operated setup of different design labs and production facilities across the United States, about 56,000 people strong. But they are embarking on a recapitalization of not only all their production and infrastructure. Some of these things date back to World War II and the Manhattan Project. All these things are being redone and made new so we can produce or sustain our current nuclear weapons and produce the new nuclear weapons to replace the ones that are 40 and 50 years old. Our challenges right now, though, are transition. Anytime you transition and do everything at the same time, you've got to really be careful about how you orchestrate that. And Major General Lutton is going to talk a little bit about that. I'm sure. I know that weighs on his mind how he's going to do that in the missile fields. So with that transition, you've got the transition in the weapon systems, you're transitioning the people. You've got to train new people to go and for instance, fly the B-21 as you retire other platforms. And so that is going to require a lot of work by Air Force Global Strike Command to ensure that they again do that just right in 20th and 8th Air Force. Definitely not to be forgotten is the Defense Industrial Base. COVID, we're coming out of COVID. We've had several challenges there. Some of those are supply chains, so we're going to have to really monitor. The DIB is really going to have to monitor the supply chain and the hiring that's going to be needed to do this modernization. Believe it or not, what I worry about most, more than anything right now, more than technology, is concrete and rebar, reinforcement steel that goes into concrete to build the 650 construction projects that we have, not just in the missile fields, but across the nuclear enterprise that have to be built in the next 12 years or in 13 states. And so we need welders and pipe fitters, electricians, all those type of folks to do this volume of work. This is something we have not seen in decades, this massive undertaking. The solution for that is just going to be a whole of government push. We've got to have the entirety of government helping with this transition and building these systems. Again, it is a lot. There are a lot of systems, but we've been living off the investments of several decades worth of the last recap we did in the 60s, we're still living off of that and living off the recap in the 80s. And now we're 40 years down the road and just starting this new recap. I think we can do it. It's going to take a lot of hard work, but we've done it before. And what I would recommend folks do is a book I read about 2 months ago. I wish I'd read it several months prior or several years ago. It's called A Fiery Peace in the Cold War by Ed Sheehan. It talks about Bernie Schriever, who got the Air Force going into the ICBM world and fielded that. And they thought differently about how they did things, differently about how they tested. And they've got that system fielded very quickly. And I offer that to the reader, to the audience out there to take a look at that, to refresh your memory on how fast our government and how fast our defense industrial base can work when there's a threat. And I would argue that the threat today is as real or perhaps worse than it was even back in the 50s. So again, thank you so much for having us here today. And I think we'll turn it over to Mike now.
Yeah, of course. Well, let me just say, tremendous. I mean, when you talk about bow wave, but your comment about raising the nuclear IQ is something that needs to be sustained. We're not across the finish line. Help you with that.
Thank you.
By the way. Hey, General Lutton, you're up. Please tell us what's on your mind.
Thanks, sir. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank General Dawkins for his decades of service to the nation. So it's great to share the stage with him today. But thanks so much for your service, General Dawkins, to the nation as a great teammate and a great part of the Joint Force. Thanks for your leadership, sir. So it's an exciting time to be in global strike in our Air Force, and in particular, 20th Air Force. It's exciting because we have our alert mission that we thrive on, that we cherish, but also we do all of our nuclear weapons sustainment in 20th Air Force. So the 377th Air Base Wing conducts all of those activities. So it's exciting times for us as we prepare for modernization in two-part, both for Sentinel, our ground-based deterrent, and Gray Wolf. And quite honestly, for me, the things I tend to focus on with the modernization are the human capital piece, the talent management, if you will, where the teams are at, and how to best position and best develop our airmen so we can be successful in executing both of those programs. So exciting opportunity. Couple of highlights from that perspective, in particular with the Gray Wolf. And Gray Wolf for us, interestingly enough, we're learning quite a bit about Gray Wolf that informs Sentinel. And one may go, well, why is that? Some of the similar questions about talent management, talent retention, talent placement, when you're fielding a new weapon system, are agnostic of the weapon system, whether it's an aircraft or a missile system. So Gray Wolf right now is teaching us some lessons that we'll definitely export to Sentinel. In particular with Gray Wolf, about a year ago, we began an effort with the Irish Air Corps and have, what I would say, developed a nice exchange program with them. And we'll continue that effort to get knowledge on the 139 platform. We've also partnered, Global Strike Command, 20th Air Force and Headquarters USAFE have partnered with the Italian Air Force, and we're looking to realize an exchange program with the Italian Air Force this summer, where one of our helo pilots will go over to Italy for 3 years and fly their version of the 139 and then come back in to our 139 community. So those are exciting times for not only our command, but our Air Force and those airmen. With respect to Sentinel, we're about setting the conditions with the operational force to realize success in the modernization effort. So what does that mean from an application standpoint? What you'd see, and some of the details are classified, and I'll be mindful of that, is our focus on F.E. Warren Air Force Base, which will be the first base for Sentinel, and the action and activities that we need to do on the installation, as well as out in the missile complex, to ensure our Air Force is successful at modernizing. And I'm very excited about our progress there. Organizationally, we've actually done some changes also to set the conditions for success for Sentinel. Some may know that we used to have a flight test squadron, a single flight test squadron. We do have that single flight test squadron still, but we have evolved to a test and evaluation group. So it's a group level effort now. We have a test support squadron, a flight test squadron, and then a maintenance test squadron, because we believe the activity for maintenance test is going to be fairly significant for Sentinel with all the new equipment that it's going to come on for that intercontinental ballistic missile system. So we're excited about those efforts and look forward to having a dialogue with you and the participants today, sir. Thank you.
Well, thanks, General. I really appreciate another aspect of that. It's that you have a great set of airmen in both your staff and out there in the field doing great work and thinking ahead. And that's really exciting for us here. So thanks for those previews, but I'd like to go a little deeper into some of these issues. I'll start with General Dawkins. We know the Air Force is really pushed, and we're finally, although it's a bow wave, maybe a tsunami-sized work ahead, but what could disrupt this? I mean, things are good, the funding's there, public is in favor of this modernization, but what could happen that might go wrong?
Well, the key is stable funding, and that's something that we've got bipartisan support on the Hill, and we have had for several years. This gets a lot of attention in the nuclear enterprise, of course, and a lot of people put a lot of scrutiny on it, and for good reason. That's the debate has been brought up to a level I've not seen in decades, probably 30 years, and that's good to have the debate. But there's been great broad bipartisan support. So something I used to worry about, I'm not as concerned about it anymore. Bigger concern, I touched on this earlier, is that defense industrial base and ensuring that we can collectively across the United States ensure we have enough workers and raw materials to produce what we need to produce on the timeline we need to produce it. Because quite frankly, we've delayed modernization so many times. We deferred programs, back in the early 2000s, and then we had sequestration hit. So we don't have a lot of margin to produce these. And while we produce these systems, we've still got to keep the current ones up to speed. In other words, the ICBMs that General Lutton commands and is in charge of out there in the missile fields have to be as good on their last day as they were on their first day. And that continues to get more challenging. So again, the sustained commitment by the Defense Department, by Capitol Hill, by defense industry, and those are the things that we've got to ensure that we keep.
Yeah, very good. General Lutton, any thoughts on that?
Yes, sir. For me, it is about two things primarily, which is efficiency and effectiveness. Effectiveness from the standpoint of being able to support our air component commander as he meets the Commander Stratcom's mission. And General Dawkins alluded to that about being as effective as we are today, that we will be on our last day. So when we look at effectiveness, I think that's absolutely critical. But there's a componency of efficiency in there. And so there's a mantra that I have, and it's, time is a commodity. And so there are things that we can do right now to set the conditions for success, both in Grey Wolf and Sentinel, that allow us the ability to remain on schedule, on time for the nation.
Very good. General Lutton, you mentioned just in passing retention, and we know that's a problem across all the services. Do you see that being a challenge for you as you go through this transition out in the field? So
there are actions that we're doing right now to expand opportunities for our airmen. So historically, and by historically, I can only talk about the time that I've served, we've never really been total force in the ICBM business. This past December, we graduated our first reservist from the U.S. Air Force Weapons School as a reserve weapons officer. Exciting time for her. She's a Pathfinder. She'll lead the way. And we are looking to build so much more total force opportunity in the ICBM business. And that does two things for us, I think, primarily. One, it gives us incredible depth of expertise. And two, it allows our airmen to have options. It allows our airmen to have options as they continue to serve in a vital nuclear career field, but also have options as they're looking both personally and professionally in their career.
It's very insightful. Well, let me come back to you, General Dawkins. You mentioned pit production. Of course, for the audience, that bowling ball or so sized piece that's got the nuclear fuel inside of it. There have been recent studies or reports that the National Nuclear Security Administration may have some problems producing those pits. And actually, that industrial base piece has been flagged for a couple decades. Are you concerned with this? Is this something that may slow down progress?
I'm concerned with NNSA capacity, just like I'm concerned about the rest of our, the defense industrial base capacity. We talked about pits. The last time that we produced a plutonium pit in the United States was about the year I entered the Air Force in 1989. And so to have taken a 30-year, be absent from producing pits for over 30 years and all of a sudden have to start that up again. It's not as simple as building an airplane, believe it or not, because these are special nuclear materials, special safeguards, and requires a lot of skill to not only make these, but also to build the facilities that they will produce these at. So NNSA has a big volume of work that they've got to do. And having served there for 2 years back in 2013 as a one-star, I know that organization pretty well, and that the people there are working hard to get us where we need to go. But because we ignored that infrastructure for so long, the NNSA infrastructure, we can't turn it around on a dime. And I know the team out there, the leadership team, are looking at this daily to ensure that not only can we produce pits, but we can produce other components that aren't talked about as much. And so this will be something that I know the Administrator Ruby and others in the administration are looking at closely. I know Capitol Hill looks at it closely. But again, we've got to give them sustained support and funding. And just like we do with DOD, ensure that we are looking critically at all the steps we're taking. But again, to give them support that they need to produce the weapons that we need to put on our deterrent.
Yeah, very good, very good. Well, another piece you referenced, General Dawkins, was the whole NC3 piece, the Nuclear Command and Control and Communications. Can you talk a little more in detail what that entails and what the status is of that piece?
Well, so the NC3, as it's called, it's confusing to a lot of folks. And I like to break it down as simple as I can. And even then, it may not be so simple. But NC3 is the architecture that has radio terminals on satellites, radio terminals in ground stations, on submarines, on airplanes, again, that are interconnected with various means of cabling. It could be telephone wires, it could be copper, it could be internet, SIPRnet. Some of these things are encrypted, some of them are not encrypted. Some of them are EMP, electromagnetic pulse resistant, some aren't. And there's so many of these different systems that it ensures that if the president has to authorize the nuclear use or stop nuclear use, his message will always get through no matter what environment. And so it's a redundant system, and it is very old. And quite frankly, it was one of the last things that we began to modernize when we set out on this modernization journey. But it's the most important, because without the NC3 system to ensure that the president's orders can get out to the force, we really don't have a deterrent, a nuclear deterrent. And so, well, again, what we're doing right now is sustaining the old systems. And I think we've just gotten away from 5.5-inch floppy disks several years ago. We don't have any more 5.5-inch floppy disks on some of these systems, but we're sustaining the old systems. We've had systems that we've been put into modernization programs 5-10 years ago that are just starting to field now. And then so there's a number of those systems, a number of those radios and terminals. I will spare you the acronym soup, but just suffice to say that they exist. I've seen them up at various production facilities, and they're making great strides in that. And we've got this future, the future comm systems. What we are trying to do in the Air Force, there's another program in the Air Force called Air Battle Management System, or JADC2 in the Joint Force, is another architecture. We're trying to make sure that what is done in the JADC2 ABMS space is not totally redundant with what we're doing. So in the nuclear command and control and communication space, we're going to try to leverage what we can with JADC2 and ABMS. And some of the defense industry experts have been talking about that too, and we're working closely with them. So it's confusing. There are about 220 NC3 systems. The Air Force has 80% of those. DISA has some number, and of course the Navy has a smaller number. So it's no small task to make sure that we sustain what we have as we transition to a modern NC3.
Yeah. How are those brought together? Those three, the services, the programs brought together.
So some of them are shared systems. Quite a few of them are shared systems, and they are. Stratcom is the operational orchestrator of all these, but we work very closely with the Navy counterparts, and of course DISA. I would like to say it works seamlessly together, because you just don't really realize whether you're transmitting on a Navy system or Air Force system. And not, when I say Air Force, by the way, I mean Space Force as well, Department of Air Force, because there is quite a bit of it that resides up there in the space realm. So right now it's seamlessly interactive. There's a lot of great airmen and civilians out there pushing hard to make sure it stays interconnected.
I just want to say also, I think General Deptula, the Dean of Mitchell Institute, has some of those 5.5 or 5.25 inch floppies in his garage. I'll talk to him later. But General Lutton, I want to ask you a little bit about the gymnastics of this massive undertaking that you're going to have to maintain your operational readiness and tempo. And I just wonder how that physical work out in the field that General Dawkins described, huge, almost historic. How's that going to affect your mission, and how are you going to work around that?
Sir, thanks for the question. And that is something that we've spent almost 2.5 years on right now, working. Some of the actions and activities are ongoing right now. I am absolutely comfortable with where the force is at right now in preparation for Sentinel, and also in our ability day to day to meet our air component commanders' requirements in support of Commander Stratcom. When I look to the future, I think it is more complex, in particular as you have two wings modernizing at the same time. That's really what our analysis over the last 2.5 years has shown us. We think that when we look at a single wing, while it will be a considerable effort, it'll be largely an effort on our contractor team, Northrop, and their subcontractors. I know that the conditions will be set at that operational wing, in particular F.E. Warren. I really don't have concerns about that, quite honestly. Where the questions I still have, and I'm still working with my team on it, are when we begin to overlap with this wing and our second wing at Malmstrom. I don't see those as insurmountable. And I mentioned time as a commodity earlier. We have the time now to think through that. We have the time now to adjust to that as needed. But again, I don't see any insurmountable challenges that we have.
Good, thank you, General. I can't fail to mention our bombers. And General Dawkins, I'm just curious that you're with us about a year ago. You talked a little bit about the implications of putting bombers back on continuous alert. Can you give us some details on what the impact is and what the parameters are to do that?
I think we have to, people like to bring that up as a possibility. And the last time we had bombers on alert, we had several hundred bombers, 400, 500, those type of numbers to be able to put on alert. And we don't. And right now we're right around 150 bombers. And by the way, those are bombers that are the nation's only bombers and our allies' only bombers. None of our allies have bomber aircraft, and none of the other services have bomber aircraft. It's just the Air Force. And so when we look at the ones that are nuclear coated, we've got about 66 of those, 20 B2s. and 46 B-52s. The B-1s that we have are conventional only now. They started out as nuclear, but they're conventional only now. And we've just had to reduce some of those because they've become so difficult to sustain. And so we're in a very low number of bombers. And so as we go forward, when we talk about putting bombers on alert, you have to ask for how long and what's the reason to do that. And when we look at bringing in the B-21, and there's been several numbers thrown around, but no less than 100. There's folks talking about 145. I know at various times. We've got to ensure that we center out on the right number of bombers, because it's not just a nuclear mission. If you stand something up on alert, you take away from the other combatant commander's ability to use the bombers for presence missions or other type of dynamic force employment. So we need to get to a set number of bombers that we can cover the combatant commander's requirements as they come up, and also be able to maintain our readiness on the nuclear side, day-to-day readiness there. But again, to have to put something back on alert is not only numbers of bombers, but it would be more people, more support equipment, more facilities. And so those are things we take seriously when we start having those discussions.
Yeah, very good. General Lutton, I want to kind of seg to another topic here. We had with the missileers out in the field, we had some ups and downs with them over the years since Strategic Air Command was in the business. And at issue, I'm talking about, the zero tolerance or zero performance defects, you probably say. And it was kind of a balance between that zero defect and a more flexible oversight of training and operations and standards. And we know that sometimes standard perfection in the old days might have created some negative behaviors. But on the other hand, we're dealing with nuclear weapons, which is understandable. So where is the aim today in training programs and operational programs for these incredibly talented airmen we have out in the missile fields?
Yeah, thanks for the question, sir. So that entire effort began under General Wilson almost 8-9 years ago, that really completely revamped our whole operational training structure, such that folks that didn't serve after 2014 wouldn't even recognize it today. And quite honestly, it's very positive. And I think one that really focuses on performance of the individual airman and the individual airman ability to assess where they're at, and also work with their leadership within their squadron, their leadership being their weapons officer, their leadership being their instructor teams, to further their development as an operator. I fully realize success is never final, right? So it's something that I do not take my eye off on. I maintain my mission ready status. I take my check rides. I take my, in fact, I'll have one this Friday, not a check ride, but my sim ride. So I am integrated into that process the best way a NAF commander could be integrated into that process to understand what the lieutenants and the captains are seeing day in and day out. What we are working with the wing commanders on, and the group commanders and the squadron commanders, in particular operations, is how do we focus and make sure that the training and the focus area is as realistic as possible, and it's focused on combatant commander and air component commander needs, and that it has a very healthy objective assessment process, so that we can, as a team, go forward and develop our teamwork going forward. So excited about that, but don't take my eye off of that. So.
Very good. Thank you, General. Hey, I do want to ask one more question, kind of in that venue, about the security piece. As you transition, we spoke about the helicopter from the UH-1 to the MH-139. And you talked about the training piece of that, but those are important to security, even as you're doing the transition to Sentinel. Is that an issue for you, and how are you going to handle that?
No, so it's, I think it's one where I talked about earlier, where Gray Wolf is kind of, if you will, kind of a lead scout for some things that we'll see with Sentinel. So one of the efforts we're working on that we've signed it out to make sure we stay on timeline with our training and our operational test is we are standing up a provisional helicopter squadron at Malmstrom. It'll be the 550th Helicopter Squadron, and its sole focus will be on training while our teammates at Maxwell ramp up their training capability. So our effort at Malmstrom for training and operational test will be no longer than 5 years, and that squadron will stand up sometime this February and take that mission for 5 years. And so we're doing that to make sure there's no disruption in our student production and, importantly, our operational test. And I'd quote General Ray here. When we're looking at our operational test, what we're not looking to do is develop old new, right? So we have a new weapon system with the Gray Wolf. So there's some great things that the Huey has done for us, but it would be completely incorrect to export every TTP from the Huey and apply it to the Gray Wolf. It would be completely incorrect to export the standard conventional load, if you will, of our defenders on a Huey and say that's what we need on a Gray Wolf. So I think those are exciting times, and they're very informative for how we'll look at Sentinel.
Yes, the history of this helicopter is just crazy. How long it's taken, and we're there now, and it's a very important part of this. Good on you both for helping that through. I want to turn a little bit to a little more about discussion of what's happening in the world. We alluded to it earlier in the discussion, and that's really what's happening in China. Open source, just amazing photos of the build out of the missile fields, of course, and what they're doing across their complex. And it took us off guard how much Russia has done, how many different programs, and they really didn't stop after the Cold War. So I wonder, looking at this world today where we've got both China, as you said, you added General Dawkins, North Korea, Russia, and others, and what we're seeing in Ukraine. What are we learning from this about how we handle our strategic deterrence operations?
Well, you talked with General Lutton about his crew force and morale. I think what we've seen in Ukraine, what we've seen with China, has really sharpened everyone's focus on the importance of having that backstop, that deterrence backstop. The silent service of those ICBM operators 24/7 for over 50 years. There's been somebody in those silos or in the launch centers waiting for a president's order, professionals. And so that, again, sharpen people's focus. I hope it's sharpening people's focus as well on that are running the programs, trying to develop the new sense of the new sets of programs and capabilities that we have. What we've also learned, I think, is, people talk about, well, would China go from a no first use to some other policy? And I said, well, I don't know. I just judge on capabilities, and capabilities take decades to develop, but intent can change overnight. And so regardless of what China's current intent may be, it could certainly change. And we think that they are going to have the capability to have a different type of intent. Korea, same thing. Again, Russia, I think it really, again, brought things into focus for NATO when Russia invaded a peaceful nation and just for land. And I think many people thought we were past that stage. That only happened in World War II or in Vietnam or PICA, Kuwait. But no, that still happens. And so we in the service right now have to take our focus from a counterterror, and we're getting there. We've made some great strides from a counterterror focus of going after cells and groups like that to get back into this state-on-state power, and how that competition or campaigning or whatever term you want to use, how we do that so we can manage our way through these tenuous times. The Defense Department, Secretary Austin's talked a lot about integrated deterrence. That's sort of like a whole of government look, if you will, using many different things, not just nuclear, of course. The other tool sets that we have to try to keep us out of conflict. But at the end of the day, knowing that we have a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent now into the future is going to give us and guarantee the security of our nation.
Oh, very good. General Lutton, any thoughts on that?
Sir, I'd add, for us from a tactical level, all the way to the operational, we've doubled down on our communication with our airmen across our force on the purpose, the why of what they're doing. And we back that up with, I think, some very good intel briefs by our intel teams that definitely, as General Dawkins alluded to, refocus and answer a lot of questions for those airmen and begin a dialogue with those airmen that are doing that day-to-day alert mission. I would also say, as we look at world events, one point that's been underscored to me, or actually two, is, and I really learned this at the National Nuclear Security Administration when I served there a couple of years after General Dawkins. There's a component to this where we have our operational deterrent force. There's a component to it where we have to ensure that we're still very active with counterproliferation. We still have to ensure that we're very active with nuclear nonproliferation. And then we have, obviously, a very healthy treaty system that is transparent and compliant. I think when you put those things together, it really positions one well for very uncertain times. The second component to it, and I think it isn't really talked enough, is how we get our airmen more immersive cultural experiences. So when we're looking at concepts like integrated deterrence, it's just not about the gear, right? There's a geostrategic component to that. I'll just use two examples within our command. Right now, we have a wing commander, Barry Little, up at Malmstrom, who's an Olmsted scholar who studied and lived in China with his family for 3 years and is fluent in Chinese. My vice, who's going to be the AFIA commander, is fluent in Russian and has been a part of those New START inspection teams. I think when you blend those experiences together with our deterrence capabilities, our nuclear nonproliferation, our counterproliferation, that is a very powerful team in support of our nation.
That's well said, General Lutton. It just so happens we have a number of college students who are zoned in today to listen to this. And I'm curious what you would say about, them coming into this in some way, whether they come into the Air Force to become part of the ICBM operation in some way, whether missileers or maintainers or food services or whatever it might be, security, or into defense industry in this way. Any thoughts about what they might want to be buying coming in?
Yeah, so whether you're coming into the defense industry, I go out and interact with folks at the various contractors and their subcontractors and others. And I always chat with them, and I chat with the NNSA people that are out there, the workers, and I say, while I will walk through an airport or walk downtown and be thankful for my service if I'm in uniform, people don't realize that the work that they are doing is for their nation as well, in the nation's defense. And so I think if you want to aspire to a higher calling, rather than go perhaps to Amazon or Google or somebody like that, although some of those organizations have a defense sector, consider going and working at a top tier lab like Lawrence Livermore, Los Alamos National Lab, Sandia National Lab, or consider going to Kansas City plant and doing cutting edge engineering and production of things that you can walk away from and go, I built that. that's a great place to look to go. Same thing with the military. If you want to go and serve your nation in an area that not many people understand, this great power competition that we're really seeing today, and so we're having a resurgence back in the 50s. There are just so few of us who understand nuclear policy and how these dynamics work that we need folks to study that piece of it as well, international relations and others. So I think that this area is ripe for folks who want to serve their nation in some manner, whether or not it's the military or a civilian or with a defense contractor to come in.
No, very good. General Lutton, any thoughts?
Sure. I think the key word there is service, and service can come in many different types and forms. As General Dawkins indicated, you can serve in any capacity in our national laboratories that are world-class. Quite honestly, there's really nothing that really comes close to our national laboratories in the United States. You can serve in that capacity, or if you're motivated to serve in uniform, I just ask you to look at the United States Air Force first. I think it's an exciting time in our Air Force. It's a challenging time. So if you like excitement, you like challenge, I think those are things that would attract you to serve in our United States Air Force.
Yeah, you've got the best, both of you got the best airmen. Well, we've come to the end of this segment. It's been a great discussion. I appreciate it. And General Dawkins, General Lutton, thank you so much for being here today. And just appreciate, and you take back to your staffs our big thanks. Okay, we're going to move to the next segment of Q&A. We'll open to the audience. Just want to remind the audience, raise your hand. When I call on your name, please unmute yourself, tell us who you are, where you're from, and ask your question. So first question we'll go to is Steve Trimble. Steve, how you doing?
Yeah, hi, thanks for calling on me. Steve Trimble with Aviation Week. I have two platform questions. The first is on SAOC. I believe the RFP is out now, but traditionally we've seen that as a commercial derivative of a four-engined aircraft, or a military derivative of a commercial four-engined aircraft. There are no four-engine aircraft in production anymore, so on the commercial side. So what are your options? Can you use a used aircraft? Do you have to do what the Navy did and go to a C-130, or can you use something like a 767 or 777? And then secondly, on Slip A, what is the future platform for that system as the Navy transitions to the C-130? Where does Slip A go and that ALCS mission?
I'll take that. So,
Yes, okay.
so the Airborne Operations Center, the replacement for the NAOC, as you talked about, again, the RFP is out there. They will continue to work that through the acquisition community on what that's going to look like and how that's going to be orchestrated. So I don't want to get out in front of my AQ counterparts over there on the E-ring. On the Slip A, Global Strike and others, we're working with the Navy and STRATCOM to develop the way ahead on that one. Make sure that we've got the same capability or improved capabilities of what we already have today.
Very good. Go to Air Force Magazine with Tobias Nagel. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
You can.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for doing this. I wanted this morning, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists moved the Doomsday Clock a little bit closer to midnight from 100 seconds to 90 seconds. You talked a little bit about deterrence, and you've talked a little bit about the risk level. So I want to come back to a couple of things you said. One was the intent to can change overnight. And in order to deter, we've got to be ready. With our modernization taking so long, what's the, do we risk moving too slowly?
Well, my response to that is what I talked about a little bit earlier. General Lutton's team has to be, and General Javera's team down at 8th Air Force have to be as good on their last day or every day as they were on their first day. So we will continue to ensure that we sustain the current weapon systems that we have, as well as they've been sustained in the past, until we have a fully fielded replacement. And so that's where what I'll tell folks is we have people that are ready and systems that are ready to execute the mission today, and will be until they're replaced.
Yeah, General Lutton, what do you think about that? You know, you're there with the crews.
Yes, sir. Yeah, for us, I mean, we have a mantra, you know, we'll move the speed of nuclear surety, right? So, you know, we will be very deliberate in our actions and activities. And I think the nation expects us to be very deliberate in those actions and activities. And as I indicated before, what we're doing right now sets the conditions and allows us to be ready to modernize when that program and, you know, my commander, the air component commander say, hey, go ahead and begin modernization. So we've begun those activities right now. And I like the position that our operational force is in right now to meet my air component commander's requirements to both meet our operational mission and then meet the mission of modernizing the force.
Yeah, very good. There is a write-in question here I want to bring in, and I'm not sure if we covered this, but it has to do with Minuteman III sustainability throughout this period of the modernization. Is that secured as far as funding and plans go?
I'll give a couple of comments and turn it over to Mike and see what he thinks. But yes, and that gets brought up anytime we talk about Sentinel or any type of new system. We always it's in the context of the ICBM systems that we have or ones that we're developing. So they're part and parcel. So we talk about them while sometimes separately. We talk about ensuring we have sustainment support necessary to keep them going. I'm realizing that's getting more difficult as I've testified in the Hill on every year that goes on to find suppliers to make these 1960s era parts in many cases. But again, we're not losing our focus on sustaining the current systems we have. I may have something.
Yeah, General Lutton, please.
Sir, I would echo that in that sustainment is a team sport. It's at the unit, but it also involves my team here, General Bell's team at the MAGCOM, and then our Air Force Materiel Command, John Newberry, who's the Nuclear Weapons Center commander. All of those teams are laser focused on ensuring that we have adequate supply chain to sustain Minuteman III. I would also say that we as a team are taking a very deliberate look at the sustainment of Minuteman III and what pieces are forward compatible, if any, with Sentinel. And so if there's a piece, let's say, that is not forward compatible with Sentinel, there will be a team discussion, team decision to put that non-forward compatible system per se at Minot or a Malmstrom that is going to get more longevity out of that system. It's a better investment for our taxpayers. And quite honestly, is going to allow us to sustain that Minuteman III system at Minot and Malmstrom a little longer.
Okay, we'll go to Frank Wolf. Frank.
Hello. Hi, how are you?
Got you.
Good. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to maybe go back to the Minuteman III for a moment. Just in terms of the conversions of the 450 Minuteman III silos to accommodate Sentinel. I just wondered, in terms, I guess Parsons Corporation is doing, I guess, some of the silo work, but I wondered just in terms of what the Defense Industrial Base needs to know, and just in terms of those conversions and sort of when the conversions at FE Warren, when do you expect them to start?
So those will be in the late 20s, mid to late 20s. Mike's already got some folks looking at things out there. But I think what the defense industry needs to know, though, is it's, again, a scale that we've not seen in in decades.
Yeah.
And when you look back to when Minuteman was initially put on the ground, we had empty fields. And then you went and you drilled down and you dug out and you put the new silos and the support equipment there. Well, now we're having to go to those sites that already have equipment in them and decommission them, dig some of it away, destroy some of the facilities, and then put new facilities where those old facilities were. And so this is the challenge. And when you're going to do one per week for 9 years, is what the average is. That's quite a big level of work. And I talked about workers and concrete and reinforcement bar and welders, all those things. It's a major undertaking that we've have not seen in over 50 or 60 years. And Mike may have something else to add.
Yeah, General Lutton, any thoughts on that?
Yes, sir. I'd just add 2 items, and it may not be well understood. The Northrop team, and General Dawkins is aware of this, and some folks are, has done some things that I think are very effective. So out in Promontory, Utah, about 1.5 years, almost 2 years ago, there was a Minuteman III launch facility that was built from the ground up. And the contract team has basically taken that Minuteman III launch facility that they built and used it to experiment with how they are going to convert the existing launch facilities out in the missile complex. So I think that is an effort that will put some time back on the clock. Another effort, I think, that is critical as we look at the concepts of how, as a team, we're going to do this. The concept is not going to be executed the same way we sustain Minuteman III, i.e. we have a main base, and then you spoke out from that main base out into the missile complex, right? I would anticipate an effort where you'll have smaller logistics, sustainment hubs forward out in the complex. So you're actually cutting down the amount of time the contractors are transiting back and forth from a main base like an F.E. Warren to, Western Nebraska or Northern Colorado or Eastern Montana. Those little efficiencies, I think, are critical when you look at the macro scale. So those are, I think, very positive indicators for me.
Very good. Let me squeeze in one last question here before we're finished. We have from Air Force Magazine also Chris Prodzic.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yep, you bet, we can.
General Dawkins, speaking to your concern about having enough workers and raw materials connected to the supply chain and all of those things. Across the force, we've seen this huge effort of working with other industries, commercial, outside of the specific force. Have you seen, or what kind of impact have you seen as a result of these kind of efforts to really expand out to like the commercial sector for development of what you need and when you need it?
Thanks for the question. If I've got it right, where can we leverage what's done in the private sector? Well, I think we're going to leverage quite a bit of what's done in the private sector. There's only so many ways you can pour concrete and weld and tie rebar and all those type of things associated with that. Notice we have not talked about really building a missile or guidance sets. I mean, we know how to put stuff into space. We know how to build missiles. We've been doing that for 15, 60 years. So to me, that's the easier part of this, not to dismiss it. But again, that's why I'm sort of really harping on this. And we will work with, Northrop Grumman is going to, pretty certain, going to subcontract all this construction out to a large company that is well-versed in construction techniques and has done big projects like this before. But even then, this may be something that's very dynamic even for that company.
Yeah, very good. Well, we've come to the end of this Aerospace
Sure, if I could
Nation.
add one on that.
Oh, sure.
If it's
sure,
okay.
Go ahead, General.
Yeah, just one that is kind of under the radar, but at the local levels, there's been quite a bit of discussion with our community colleges, our trade schools in and around the local area, definitely socializing that so they can be postured as needed as General Dawkins indicated. I think that's pretty critical. And we've seen that be successful with the National Nuclear Security Administration, some of their partnerships. So just wanted to add that piece, sir.
No, that's a great point, General. Well, thank you out there zooming in on us, General Lutton. We really appreciate it. And to you, General Dawkins, please pass your airmen our appreciation and thanks for their service. And call on Mitchell Institute if you need any support in the future. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you.
You bet. Well, to you all in our audience, and it's all from Mitchell Institute, the entire team, have a great Aerospace Day.